Hi everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I'm back today to do a little video with you guys. I'm kind of working on a trial and error video on how to create this teardrop shape using tubular peyote, or I like to think of it more as flat circular peyote, where you build out the one side, you sew into the center, then you build the other side out and zip the two outside edges together. We've done this before. We made several different shapes so far, only Alluring Bead Boutique. And we also made a different, this was a custom request from a lady who messaged me on my Facebook page. And I had already done one of these where I showed you guys how I came out with the idea of how to make the semicircle, like the half circle. And I'll throw some links up to that. I've got this one made, but I'm not completely happy with the outside edge. I made my notes as I went along, so we'll be going off of my notes. As you can see, because we're using delicate beads here, when you get to the place where you need to do some increasing and decreasing, you see I've got a few little beads that kind of poke out at like a corner as opposed to a more rounded look. That was the reason why on the semicircle one I used 11C beads in place of the delicates. And I got a couple of ideas of different ways to try this particular shape here. So I'm going to be revamping this pattern just a little as we work along, and we're going to see how this one comes out. So for the materials I'm just using 2 colors of 11 delicates. I've got a little corner bead here. Don't need a whole lot of these. These are the metallic rainbow dark copper delicate beads. And these are just some dark opaque chocolate brown Mayukis that I got over at Hobby Lobby. I've got a wingspan and a half of some Fireline 0.006 beading thread. I'm already threaded on. I've picked up my beads and went ahead and got them tied into a circle, as you can see here. So what do you pick up? You're going to pick up first, you're going to pick up the 2 of your corner beads, which I'm using these pretty metallic colored ones, and then 45 of your color B. So we'll call the tip beads color A, the opaque beads color B. So pick up 2 tip beads plus 45 of your other beads. Go ahead and pass through the beads again. You can either tie a knot there, but if you're good with tension, you don't have to tie a knot. You can simply continue on to close the loop by passing through the first tip bead that you picked up, the first copper bead. And then we're ready to get started. So let me clean my work area up and I'll be right back to get to work. So the first thing we're going to do is we are at the tip. So we're exiting 1 copper delica. We're going to pick up 2 more. And we're going to sew down through that very next tip copper delica bead right there. We're going to pull those 2 beads into position so that they sit at a catty-corner angle, just like a herringbone stitch right there. And as a matter of fact, you want the 2 beads to position themselves above the 2 beads on your base so that they look just like a herringbone stitch, so that they sit at that little herringbone angle that you see right here. And now we're just going to peyote using our color B beads all the way around our little loop here. So if you're unfamiliar with peyote, I'll show you a couple of the stitches. You pick up a bead, you skip over the bead in front of the one you're exiting, and you sew through the next bead. Just make sure you're going through 1 bead. So we're picking up 1, skipping 1, and sewing through the next. Having a little bit of a difficult moment here. Okay, so we're picking up 1, skipping 1, and sewing through the next. And when you pull that bead into position, it should sit side by side beside the bead that you skipped over, just like a peyote stitch. See how it's sitting side by side next to the bead that we skipped over. And that's all we're going to do all the way around our little circular shape here. I'm going to pick up a bead, skip a bead, and sew through the next. I'll show you guys one more. I picked up my bead. I'm exiting from this bead. I'm going to skip that bead and sew through this bead right here. I need to get a sharper needle out. You can see right there. And that's all I'm going to do all the way around. So go ahead and peyote all the way around, and I'll meet you guys right back before I add my last bead. As you're working around the curve down here, what we need to keep in mind is that this is a piece of flat work. We do not want to pull so tight that it pulls this beadwork to where it's not flat. We want it to lay flat on the beading surface all the way around this curve. One thing I want to point out also is that if you'll remember, when we're working this type of peyote or any type of peyote, the beads you pick up on your initial round will constitute the beads of rows 1 and 2. The beads we're adding now in this round constitute row 3. So here I have it. I've worked my way around and I've kept my work nice and flat. And I'm getting ready to add the last bead. My working thread is here, exiting from this bead. The bead in front is the opaque color B bead I need to skip over. I've picked up my 11-0 and I am sewing up through the first copper bead on our original base we picked up at the beginning, but I'm also stepping up through the copper bead above it that we added in this current round. And what we're doing in essence is adding the last bead and stepping up at the same time. So now, once we're stepped up, we're ready to begin the next round. To begin the next round, we need to do our corner beads again, our tip beads. So I'm going to pick up 2 of my copper beads. I'm exiting the top of this bead. I'm going to sew down the next copper bead, just the very first bead there. And once again, you want to position those beads so that they sit looking like a herringbone stitch, because that's what they are, at this little catty corner angle like that, like an inverted V. And once we've done that, we are going to go ahead and just pick up our color B beads and peyote through all the sticking out beads from the previous round. So I'm picking up my bead and I'm going through that very first chocolate brown bead. When you pull that bead into position, you see that it sits in the gap that was between the copper bead and the first chocolate bead. So it fills that little gap right there. There's the bead we just added. We're going to do that and fill in all of these little gaps till we work ourselves all the way around. On this particular row 4, it is very, very important to resist the urge to overpull these beads. We really want this work to lay nice and flat on our work surface or our hand. We do not want it to start arcing up or turning to, till it's bow-like. Sorry I'm having such trouble focusing the light today. So just go ahead and peyote all the way around, and I'll meet you back at the end. So to help myself resist the urge to overpull this beadwork, as I'm working, you can see the position of the beadwork on my middle finger here. What I like to do is I like to take my thumb and pinch the beadwork right there as I'm pulling that bead into position. It helps me resist the urge to overpull the work and keep the beadwork from laying flat. Once you reach the end of the row, do not forget that as you're adding this last bead, you will pass through the copper bead from your previous round plus the very first bead of this current round to perform your step up and get your last bead added in the proper position, just like this. Begin this round just like you normally would by picking up your 2 tip beads, sewing down the next tip bead, getting your beads set into position so that they look properly, and then we are going to have to do some counting as we do our regular peyote stitch around this next row. To begin with, I want you to do, we're going to start with 7 regular peyote stitches. So just go ahead and do 7 regular peyotes down the long side here, making sure you don't skip over any, and that all of your beads sit into position just like that. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look over here at my little chart that I made. All right, so here we are on row 5. We've done our 7, 2 in the corner, and our 7 regular peyotes. Don't mind this little scratched outline here. The next several stitches, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use some 2-dot peyote to increase the beadwork. And the reason that we have to do some increasing on the beadwork is because we have this rounded edge. If you remember back to the half circle tutorial, you're going to have to do increases here, or you're going to have a lot of big gaps and a lot of thread showing. In a perfect world, I could legitimately, if I had any, 11-0 round Mayuki chocolate brown seed beads. I would use those in here to make that curve look a lot better. But I don't have any, and our results are going to have a few little poking out spots. But I did figure out a way to eliminate a couple of those, and that's what we're going to do. We've done our 7 regulars, so now we're going to pick up 2, and we're going to do a 2-dot stitch. And all that means is you're picking up 2 delicas and sewing through the next sticking out delica from the previous row. And you're going to pull those beads into position right here and fill in that, little bit bigger gap. So we've done a 2. Now we need to do a single drop, pick up 1, sew through the next. And if you want to write this down, I'll go ahead and leave it up here first. I'll put it in the notes below what where the 2 drops and the single drops are from the continuation of the project. Or actually, I will put it not in the notes below. It will be in the corresponding blog post on the alluringbeadboutique.com. All right, so we've done a 2 and a 1. So now we're going to do a 2 drop here. So pick up 2 and sew through the next. Anywhere where we have a little bit bigger gap, we want to drop in 2 beads as opposed to 1. And you want to make sure that those beads round as good as they can. If there's not enough room for the 2 beads, they're going to sit really poking up, something similar to this, and then you will know that you need to go back to a single drop. But when I put those 2 in, they come around the curve relatively nice like that. And so for the next stitch, we're going to try another 2 drop. So far we've done a 2, a 1, a 2, and this is another 2. And then you can check to see how they look. And if they don't look right, you can drop it back to a 1 drop. Those look okay. But now for the next stitch, I'm going to definitely do a 1 drop. Because this little side here is kind of straight. This little part of the bottom of the teardrop is kind of straight. And we can get 1 bead in there and it looks fine. We might have could get away with 1 bead in this one. So let's go ahead and change that out. I'm going to backtrack. And just pull that single bead off. And then I'm going to backtrack and pull that last double stitch off. The last 2 drop stitch. And it's real easy. Just sew back through the sticking out bead. Pull your thread through. And take off 1 bead. Because we're obviously going to need 1. All right, so I decided I'm going to go, let's go back to our original chart here. So we have a 2, a 1, a 2. Now we're going to do a 1, another 1, and a 1. So those 3 stitches there at the bottom of our curve, we're going to do single drop. So after we've done those 3 single ones, we need to do 1 more single. So after we've done those 3 single ones, we need to do 1 more single. And I do apologize, but what I'm doing is working through this new adaptation on film. So here we are. Let's start over here. Let's see where we're at. We got 7 regular, we did our tip beads, our 7 regular peyotes. Then we're going to have a 2-drop, a 1-drop, a 2-drop. Then I want you to do 5 single drops across this, smoother part of the curve. Then we're going to do the 2, 1, 2. The next stitch is going to be a 2-drop, a regular stitch, and I'll try to correct some of this up in the editing. And then 1 more 2-drop. And then you should have 7 regular peyote stitches up to you to the point. Make sure your beads don't get caught up on anything else. So this is what I have. And now I'm going to do my 7 stitches up the side. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that works out. Remember, as you add that last bead, you're going to sew up through the tip bead from the previous round plus the very first bead from the current round we're working on to step up, just like that. Of course, row 6 is going to start the same way as all of our other rows. We're going to pick up 2 and sew down the next tip bead. I'm going to work those beads slightly till they sit the way we want them to. And now we're going to regular peyote around this project again. And we're going to check through as we go to make sure that we don't have any places where the gap is too big and we need to put a double. So we're going to start off slow. We're going to peyote down the side here. We can go ahead and know that we have at least 7 regular peyote stitches to do here. So just go ahead and work your way down the side just like we did before. After you've done your 7 regular peyote stitches, you're going to come to your first set of doubles. So we're going to pick up 1 delica, but this time we got to sew through both of those beads from our 2-drop. So we're going to pick up 1, sew through 2. And now we are at our single, so we'll just pick up 1 and sew through 1. We have our next set of 2-drops, so we'll pick up 1 and sew through 2. And then as we go across those 5 singles, we're just going to go ahead and I think we can make it with just a single peyote bead through these 5. Double check. I picked up 1 and I'm sewing through 1. And I'm going to work my way around this curve. And hopefully it's not going to pull my curve off of the flat plane. The trick to it is we want this beadwork to stay on a flat plane like this. And so far we're looking pretty good. Let's keep going around. So we have, we've got 5 singles to do. So that was 1, 2, 3, and resist that urge to overpull. And there's my 5th bead. Now I'm going to look really close. You can see that as I pull these beads in, it wants to curve this little beadwork up into a bowl shape. But that we don't want that to happen, so loosen up your tension until the work lays flat. So now we're back to our next set of doubles, so we can pick up 1 and sew through 2. Just like we did on the other side, we're mirror imaging on this side. Then we've got pick up 1, sew through 1. And then pick up 1, sew through 2. Make sure your beadwork is nice and flat. And then regular peyote stitch up this side, just like we did before. So hopefully I didn't confuse you on this row. Basically, this row was really easy. All we did was regular single drop peyote all the way around the entire shape. The only thing we had to manipulate is when we needed to sew through our sets of 2 from the previous round. Otherwise, we only added 1 bead in each stitch in this row 6 here. Now we're going to do a row 7 here. And what we're going to do, instead of adding 2 beads at the top, we're just going to put 1 little bead to make this beautiful little point that you see here. So we're just going to pick up one of our color A copper beads, and we're just going to sew down the copper bead beside of it like this. We're going to position that little bead so it sits like this at the top. And if it doesn't stay straight, pointing sideways, don't worry about it. When we do our next side, it'll straighten that up. So now we're going to peyote, regular peyote, all the way down till we get to this large gap right here. Can you see this gap? Right there, we're going to have to do another double. So we'll go ahead and peyote all the way down to that. So let's count them. There's 1, 2, and you have to have this length of thread so that you have enough thread to do both sides. 3, 4, and if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be 8. So make sure you're passing through only the sticking out bead and not a bead below. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we need to do a total of 8 regular peyote stitches. So in essence now we should be able to do row 7 exactly as we did row 5. The only difference is going to be is that we have 8 regular peyote stitches here and 8 here. So the next sequence is going to be 2, 1, 2. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 8 stitches up this side. So let's go ahead and see if it pans out just like I'm thinking it should. So I'm going to do a 2 drop, a 1 drop, and remember that we want this work to lay nice and flat and for those beads to flow smoothly around the side of our curve here. So the next one is a 2. So 2, 1, 2. And then we're going to do 5 single stitches around this part of the curve down here at the bottom. So there's 1. 2. 3, and make sure you resist that urge to bowl this work up into like a cup. We don't want that one flat. Kind of lost my count, so I'm going to have to take a look back. 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 1 more to do. And then I'm going to do a 2 drop, a single drop, and a 2 drop. So that's time for our 2 drop here. You can see that that gap is pretty big. And that 2 drop is going to take care of that for us. Keeping my work flat. A single. And then you can see here we have this nice big gap here that we need to put another 2 drop in. And then we should be able to do the last 8 stitches in regular peyote. And our work's going to lay flat. The curve's going to look nice and smooth on both sides. Just like that. All right, so get your last 8 regular peyote stitches in, and I'll meet you back. This time when you reach the end and you're adding that last bead, you're only going to go up through that one copper bead from the previous row, because remember, this time we have that little horizontally placed bead here at the tip. So then I want you to sew across that bead, and that will complete the round and be considered stepping up. Okay. And so here's what our beadwork is looking like. It is looking pretty good. It's relatively flat and should be plenty easy enough for us to make this figure. And I think I have, by changing what I did on the sequence of teardrop beads, I think I may have resolved some of this pointing out beads here that you see here. I did a lot more teardrops in this component than I did on this one. If you'll notice here, look on row 7 how many teardrops I had. And you can see where I scratched out the 2s on row 5. I've got my corrections made here. But look, row 7 was the same as row 5. Look how many teardrops I had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I did not like the end result. So we'll see if this straightened up my project for me. I'm going to point out to you something I've noticed here. So when I came around on this row 7, and I did my 2, 1, 2. Then I did my 5 singles. I almost wish that I had went 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. Because I'm seeing a little bit of white thread here. I don't know if you notice it, but this should be a two-drop stitch. So actually I changed my mind, and through the wonderful magic of television, I went back and corrected this little part right there. You can see I changed it to that 2-drop. And check it out. So it does actually sit much flatter and look much better. So now I'm just coming across that tip bead like I did before. And we are ready to build the second half of this, the inside edge. We're going to come down here and start sewing through here. We're going to work our next part of this project outwards towards this row that we just completed. We've done this before. You can go back to some other of my shaped peyote videos, and there are plenty of them here on YouTube. So now that I have stepped up and I'm coming out of my little horizontal tip bead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of my, or however many I've got there, of my copper bronze beads. So let's go ahead. We're going to sew straight down through those herringbone stitch beads. And we're also going to sew through that very first chocolate opaque bead sitting right there. So I'm coming down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my coppers and into the very first chocolate bead right there. So it's 6 beads in total. And that's going to just move us into position to begin working on the other part of our project. And like I said, resist that urge to pull it tightly because you really need this to be as flat as it can be. So what we're going to be working with in this first round is we're going to be working with the row 1 beads. And you can see that they stick out here in the center. They're also sticking out beads. They just happen to be in the center of this teardrop. So what we're going to do is we are going to regular peyote all the way around this first row until we come through, we sew through and add our last bead here. We will be adding that last bead between this chocolate bead and this chocolate bead. So just do single drop peyote all the way around. And I'll meet you guys back and show you what to do. Before I go, as I mentioned, this is the row 1 bead. So what we're in essence working on is row 2 of the other side of our project. It's a little difficult working in here, but I have found that if you place your thumbnail like this, as you position these beads, you kind of want those to come across. We're going to be sewing from this row outwards. So if you put your thumbnail there, you see that it helps to get those beads in the right position and start the movement going in the right direction on this new part of the beadwork. It gets a little tight sewing this second row that we're working on here. And what you want to look for is you want to make sure that your beads are popping into position. You see how it looks like a zipper? You don't want to pull super duper tight, but you may have to tug a little sharply here and there to get those beads positioned to where they line up really nice and straight and even like this. And you also want to make sure that as you're sewing through, you don't accidentally sew through two of your base, your zipper teeth sticking out here on the base. So take your time and work yourself around the project. So as you can see here, I am getting ready to sew in this last chocolate bead. And you'll notice that I am sewing up through a chocolate bead. So once I've got that bead positioned into place, now we have to create the tip beads on this side. So we're exiting this chocolate bead. We're going to pick up two of our metallic copper beads here. We are going to cross over and sew down through the chocolate bead right beside the one our working thread is exiting. You see that we're exiting this bead. So we're going to sew down through this bead, and then we need to step up into the first bead of this round, which is this one right here. So I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to come through both of those beads at the same time. Give me just a second, and I'll show you what it looks like. And if you can't get through both of them, you may need to do it in 2 steps. I think I can get there if I take my time. Well, I'm having a difficult moment, so there we go. Now I've got it. All right, so let's look at it again. Here's my working thread. Exiting right here on this bead. I need to come down through the bead right beside of it, plus step up into my first zipper bead of the current round that we're working on to create my step up. Now we're going to do the same thing with these beads here. We want to position those 2 beads so that they sit looking like a herringbone stitch right here. And the easiest way to do that is to take your needle and pull up the thread that sits between those 2 beads like this, just ever so lightly. And then when you pull it back down, they will position themselves in the herringbone catty corner position. A little hard to see here, but right there they are, those 2 little copper beads. And now we're ready to just go ahead and do round 3. And we're going to do rounds 3 and 4 just exactly like we just did. We are going to regular peyote stitch all the way around till we add the last bead. Only at the end of this next round, as we add our last bead, we are going to be adding it between the chocolate bead and our first copper bead here. And then we'll create our tip just like we did. So let's go ahead and peyote around, and I'll meet you back and show you what I'm talking about. As you can see, I've worked my way around this beadwork. I'm getting ready to add this second to the last bead. I've picked up a chocolate bead, and I'm sewing through that last sticking out chocolate bead. I still have one more to add. You can see there's a gap here between this last chocolate bead I sewed through and this first copper bead. So we have to put a bead in there. So we're going to pick up a chocolate bead, and we're just going to sew up through that copper bead right there. Then we're going to do our 2 copper beads. We're going to make our next point. We're picking up 2 copper beads. We're going to sew down through only the copper bead on this side. So just come down through the next copper bead, just like a herringbone stitch. Make sure your beads sit and look correctly. And then we're going to pick up a chocolate bead, and we're going to sew through the next chocolate bead from the previous round. Then we're going to step up into this bead that is above it, which is the first bead of this last round we're working on, of the current round. So now we need to step up before we begin our next round. And when you look at everything up close and personal, you will see that all those little zipper teeth are in the right position. We have our tip beads in place right here, and everything looks really good. So that was row 3, and we need to do one more round just like we did on this round. We're going to single drop peyote all the way around with our chocolate beads. We're going to pick up that last chocolate bead and sew up into the copper bead here on this side. Add the tip beads, but only this time when we come back around, the place where we step up is going to move down towards the rounded area one more stitch, just like it did here. So I'm going to go ahead and put all of my regular peyote single drop chocolate beads into place for row 4. I'll meet you guys back to do the corner and then work our way to the step up. I also wanted to point out to you guys, if you'll notice now how that we're getting some length on this inside side of our peyote. Look how it creates this natural curve working its way towards the front side. And also, if you'll notice, the front side starts to form its own natural curve, and everything looks really pretty for when we get ready to zip the two sides together. So here I have come around again on row 4, and I'm at the tip here, so I've got to add this last chocolate bead between the previous chocolate bead and the copper metallic bead. So I'm going to pop that bead into place, and my thread is exiting from the copper bead. So now I need to do my corner. I'm going to point, so I'm going to pick up 2 of my copper beads and sew down just the copper bead on the other side. Right here. Take my little herringbone stitch. Make sure my beads look nice and are sitting properly. Kind of hard to see, so you may have to fold this part back to actually get a good look at the beads and make sure they're sitting at that inverted V. And they are now. So now I'm going to take a chocolate bead. I have to sew through the next sticking out bead from row 3, which is kind of hard to see, but it's right there. Try a different angle. Pull that in. And now I need one more bead, and you notice that my step up has moved forward again one. So I'm going to pick up this chocolate bead. I'm going to sew through the sticking out bead from row 3 plus the first bead of row 4 for my step up. So I'm sewing through those 2 beads right there. Pull. And now we're ready to begin the next round. And see how that's curving? Really nice to form a pretty center. Of course, the center on this one looked really good too. Where I didn't like was mostly this outer edge stuff. So now we're getting ready for row 5. And row 5 should be exactly the same as our row 5 on the front side. So remember, we had 7 regular, 2 drop, single drop, 2 drop, 5 single drops, 2 drop, single drop, 2 drop, and then 7 regular. So we're going to do the same thing for row 5 on the inside of our beadwork. So in essence, these 2 rows should be the same. However, we're not starting the row from the same position. If you'll remember, on the front side of our beadwork, we started at the tip every time. And here we are on this particular part of the project, we are starting nowhere near the tip. We are several stitches away from the tip, as you can see right here. So as we begin to work this row, we need to think about what position we are actually in. When we come back around and do our tip right here, we're actually, the first bead of the row is going to be sitting right here. So that'll be 1, 2, 3. We're starting at the 4th bead. So we're going to count this bead as bead 4. The very first one we're putting in is bead 4. 4. 5. 6. 7. So at this point, we can actually begin our sequence of a 2-drop, 1-drop, 2-drop. This should be 5 right here. 5 single drops, 2-drop, 1-drop, 2-drop. So let's give that a shot. If you take a close look, you'll see where our working thread is exiting, and you'll notice that directly in the direct line here are our two sets of 2-drop peyote where we started. So we know that we're in the right position. So folks, once again, remember that this is in theory, and if we don't like it, we can always take it back out. So I'm going to go ahead and do my first 2-drop. You can see that those beads really don't sit as beautifully as the first set of 2-drop beads we did. We need to keep in mind that we're going to be rolling these beads out this way. And we're also going to do another row of single drop peyote that's going to come back through and kind of straighten some of those up. So let's leave them for now. So that was our first 2 drops. Now we need to do a single drop. Pick up 1. We're going to do another 2-drop. Then we're going to do 5 single drop peyote stitches. So 2, 1, 2. Now 5 regular stitches around this curve. But before we do our tip beads at the top and everything, we're going to see if we think if it looks right. There's 2. 3, 4, and 1 more. And then we should be back to in position to do a 2-drop, single, 2-drop. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to double check my work. So I did a 2-drop, single, 2-drop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm ready for my 2-drop. A single. Make sure your beads don't get hung up back here. And my last 2-drop. And now I should have 7 stitches between here and the top. So we'll go ahead and do our 7 regular peyote stitches. We're going to make sure that this worked out the way I think it should have. 1. Now I'll make you watch me do 7 regular peyote stitches, but I'll meet you back at the top. So that worked out like I thought, and I had 7 regular peyote stitches here. I'm adding that last bead and sewing up into my copper bead. Now I need to add my 2 tip beads. So we're going to pick up our 2 coppers, and we're going to sew down the copper on the other side, just like we've been doing the whole time, taking that little herringbone stitch at the corner. And if you'll notice that your thread has a tendency to want to hang up a lot on these poking up beads everywhere. So now that I get those beads in place, I should have 3 stitches left before I need to step up. So I'm going to pick up my chocolate bead and go through the next bead on row 4. I have another one, so that's 2. Sorry if I got out of frame there. My light is terrible in here today. And as you can see, I have 1 more bead I need to add between this bead I'm exiting and this bead here, and then there's my step up. So that actually worked out till we had 7 regular peyote stitches on this side as well. So there's where I'm stepping up. I'm going through, picked up my bead, going through the bead of the previous row plus the first bead of my current row that I'm finishing up, which is row 5. Get my tail thread out. And there we go. So now, row 6 is going to be really, really easy because all we're going to do is do a single drop peyote all the way around. And then, of course, do our tip beads. Finish up the 6th row and step up. Once we finish this last row, we'll be ready to zip our 2 sides together here. As I work this last row of regular peyote, as I pick up my bead and sew through the next bead, we need to be aware of where we've got our doubles. So I'm coming out of this bead here. I picked up my bead, but I'm sewing into a 2-drop stitch, so I need to pass through 2. And as I pass through on this row, as I pull my bead into position, I'm going to kind of pull my thread out to the side like this to encourage this curve to take a more natural shape. Let me show you again. I'm picking up a bead. My next stitch was a single, so I sewed through 1. As I pull that bead into position, I'm pulling the thread straight out to the side like this. All right, the next stitch was a double, so we'll pick up 1, and we're going to sew through the 2 beads of our 2-drop stitch. And then our next 5, are singles. So we just pick up 1, sew through 1. We're encouraging our beads to curve around. So hopefully this thing looks really nice at the end. This is actually the 3rd try I've made attempt at making this teardrop. The first one was a total disaster and was immediately cut apart. So I'm rounding these single drop stitches by, filling in the ditch, filling in the beads. But pretty soon I'm going to be back to another 2-drop stitch. So I need to pay attention to where my next 2-drop stitch is. And make sure as I add my bead, I sew through 2. So we are coming around. And there's my next stitch, which is a 2-drop. So I need to pick up 1 and sew through 2. Pick up 1, sew through 1. Then we have one last 2-drop stitch we need to sew through. So we'll pick up 1 and sew through the 2 beads of that 2-drop stitch. Right here. And then we can single peyote all the way up to the point again. And I'll meet you back and we'll finish off this last bit of row 6. So in that last chocolate bead of the left side, positioning up by sewing up through the copper bead at the tip, we do have the one last set of tip beads that we need to add so that both sides of our component are a mirror image of each other. So we'll pick up 2 and just sew down that next copper bead. It's exactly like we've been doing with that herringbone stitch. Make sure your beads sit nicely and are looking like a herringbone stitch, like an inverted V. Now we're going to finish off the right side of the of this particular component. So we're going to pick up 1, sew through 1. We're going to finish filling in row 6 on this side because remember our step up kept moving down and moving down and moving down. So we have 1, 2, 3, and the last stitch, the 4th bead, we will go through the bead from row 5 and step up into the row 6 bead as we add this last bead right there. And now we are ready to zip up this component. you can hopefully have something a little prettier than we had here. And I think I might have gotten it figured out to where it looks more rounded. If you notice, because we have 7 rows of bead work on the front side and 6 rows on the back side, if you hold this up and look at it together like this, you can see that both sides create the look of a zipper. We're exiting this thread here on the back side. To zip up, we're just simply going to put a thread between the beads on this side, this side, this side, this side, like a zipper. So there's my working thread exiting that bead. Here's my needle. I'm sewing through the bead, kind of up one and to the left, plus the bead, the next sticking out bead on the right. I like to do it two stitches at a time and where I can, because it saves time. But when you get to these doubles, you got to be really careful. So we've got one stitch that is normal, zipping stitch. Here's another one that's normal, where we're going through one bead on each side. But if you'll notice right here, I actually think I have one more I could do. I have one more normal zip stitch right there before I hit a double. Because remember, on row 7, we had some sets of 2-drop. So here's my first set of 2-drops. So I'm going to come through 2 on the left side, because I'm left-handed. That's where mine is. And 1 bead on the right side. You can see I'm passing through both beads of that 2-drop peyote and the single drop over here. We're going to pull that in. And you see it becomes seamless. Then we went back to a single drop, so we know we have only 1 bead on each side to concern ourselves with. But then we've got another 2-drop. And this is where it probably would help if you have some magnifying glasses, put them on if you need them. So I'm going to get mine, because after all this hard work, I'd really hate to mess things up right now. So here I am at a 2-drop. So I am picking up the 2 on this side and the 1 on this side. Now here you might need to do a little manipulation to make your curve nice and smooth. We're back to a single drop and a single drop. So we're going to go through 2. And notice how I pull my thread. Let me come out a little bit. As I do that, I don't pull back on my thread this way. I pull my working thread forward, or like I'm pulling it around the curve. So I've got another single drop set here. So I've got a single drop on each side, doing the same thing, 1 on each side in the zigzag fashion. But remember, I sewed back down and I put a 2-drop here in the middle. So I've got to go through 2 and 1. And I'll pull that thread forward in this direction. Now I am down to another single right there. And another one of those. 1 bead on each side. As I zip, pull my thread across the work this way. And if you'll notice, that looks a lot better without those poking out beads that you see here. Okay, so let's finish zipping. We're back to a 2-drop, so we need to make sure we grab both of the beads on the front side and the single bead on the back side. Pull our thread forward. A single and a single. So now we're down to 1, 1. Hope you can see what I'm doing here. Now we have one last 2-drop stitch to worry about right here. So pick up the 2 beads on this side and the single bead on the other side. Pull your thread in that forward motion. Yeah, I'm much happier with this outcome. So now we're just going to keep zipping all the way around. 1 bead at a time on each side. I like using my magnifying headset for this because it's really terrible to get such beautiful peyote beadwork done and then to simply have an exposed thread as you are zipping things up. Especially since I used white thread so you guys could actually see what I'm doing better with these dark beads. But if everything goes smoothly, at the end, you shouldn't see one single speck of white thread anywhere. So I'm coming up towards the tip bead. So let's keep going. Keep going. Trying to make sure my focus is still good. It's hard to see my focus when I've got a magnifying glass on my head. So now I've got 2 more I can do right here. Here and here. At the same time. And then I'm going to come over to this section here where I've got 1 single chocolate bead left on the left. Yours could possibly be on the right. Then I'm going to come back through a copper bead here on the right. Next, I'm going to go so horizontally through that little 1 bead we put on row 7. And here we're going to pull again in this direction. Now we're going to come down the copper bead on the back side of the pendant, just like this right here. And then we can start zipping again like regular peyote. Pull that thread following the line of my project. And it keeps any exposed thread from showing through. So now I'm ready to go back to doing peyote here. I've got a chocolate bead on the left and a chocolate bead sticking out on the right. So now I can go back to that zipper stitching I was doing and pulling my thread following the slope of my beadwork. And we're almost there because we just got to sew back around to where we actually started zipping from, which was only a few stitches down. And we will take one last look and see how our beads actually look on those curves. The simplest way is to use round seed beads, but you would still have to do increases and decreases. Or not decreases, just increases. And so here's my last zipping stitch where I have only 1 bead left on the left-hand side to sew through, but I'm also going to try to sew through that bead on the right as well. And I'm going to try to get it in one pass. And like I said, I'm going to still follow the slope of my beadwork as I pull this thread. So let's take a look at this one. All right, so let's take a little moment here to do some comparison. This is the project that we just completed, and this is the one I made previously. If you'll notice, a couple of things happened. The first thing that happened is because I used a lot less teardrop stitches on this component than I did on the previous one, you'll notice there's a little tiny bit of difference in the length of the components. However, the other thing that you notice about the 2 components is this one looks much more smoothly rounded without these protruding points of these little, cylinder beads that happened here where I used the more teardrop stitches. So basically, I'm going to have to say this is kind of like a matter of design choice. And any time that you are doing a peyote project like this, it is best for you to learn to eyeball where your increases actually should be, where you're going to have enough room to squeeze those extra beads in. And learn how to make your own judgments with this. I went ahead and agreed to do this for a lady over on my Facebook page because basically I've been wanting to try to figure this component out myself. And I think I did a pretty good job. Now, if you wanted this thing to be longer, obviously, you would start with your same 2 corner beads, but you would pick up more beads for your initial pickup going this way. The trick to that is going to be you're going to need an odd number of beads of your color B beads. You need 2 of the color A, but you'll need 45, 47, 49, 51, whichever one you want to pick up. Or you can go shorter. You could go 43, 41, 39, depending on what size you want to actually make the length of your component. On the photograph she sent me, someone had done a peyote bezel of looked like probably an 8mm chaton. And then they had stitched that inside of the teardrop using some like 2 or 3mm bicone crystals. And it was really pretty. So I don't want to steal somebody's idea and show you how to do somebody else's idea. But this is a basic shape. And I thought we could have a lot of fun seeing if we could figure out how to make it look a little more professional. And it does. All right, guys, that's it. I want to thank you for watching. It's been a lot longer video than what I had planned. There will be all kinds of information that correspond with this particular tutorial and some step-by-step photos, not the full tutorial. I won't have full photos, but I will write out exactly what you need to know and give you the materials list and all that stuff. So make sure you check out thealluringbeadboutique.com, subscribe to my channel, and go over there and subscribe to my newsletter. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.